in this video, I'm gonna demonstrate and showcase how SME is running the SAP ERP cloud like Business ByDesign or S/4HANA Cloud can connect and seamlessly integrate with an e-commerce solution like Shopify for B2B or B2C scenario, thanks to the help of the SAP Integration Suite. So in that integration scenario, an end user in Shopify store will create a sales order asking or purchasing some items, and then that order will be replicated and reflected automatically into the Business ByDesign system with the help of the SAP Integration Suite. The SAP Integration Suite is actually an open and modular integration platform as a service, supporting your enterprise-wide integration needs for both SAP and even non-SAP integration scenarios. So it's going to enable your enterprise to seamlessly integrate, easily connect on-prem and on-cloud based applications, even processes and people with speed and ease. So let's start. That's my store in Shopify, where I'm gonna simulate creating an order and purchase some items, and then once the order is created, we should expect to see it on the back-end ERP. So before doing the order, I'm gonna show a high-level integration flow of the whole scenario, where we can see on the left side the endpoint Shopify, and on the right side the endpoint as for example the SAP ERP Cloud Business ByDesign. So if we start from Shopify, and end user gonna create an order, and then with the help of the integration scenario built on top of the SAP Integration Suite, it's gonna connect with the Shopify REST API, looking for the order events, and then reading the order, transforming it in a way that it can be represented into the back-end Business ByDesign and posted successfully through the OData API service from Business ByDesign. So let's start the demonstration by creating an order, looking for the product, gas boiler, one item for the price of 430. The end customer is Mr. Franksent from the ServerStar Wholesale Core Company. I'm gonna put a customer note Shopify in order to see that note also created into the back end as part of the sales order representation. And then we're gonna simulate the payment, as this is a demo, and then create the order, converting it from a draft to order with the ID that we're gonna see just in a few seconds now, which is 1080 or 58. Yes, 1058. And that's the price, that's the item we purchased, and so on. Now, if we look at the integration scenario from Shopify and BYD, or between Shopify and BYD, we can see here that's the integration flow. I'm gonna deploy it once. It's inactive, so I'm gonna activate it now. Then we should expect to see the order in the back end, that is the Business ByDesign. Now, if we look at the ERP system, sales order, business area, where I'm actually sitting now, and then looking at today's orders, we see a new order that has come up with the order ID 3967. That's the ID in Business ByDesign, and you can see external reference which is equivalent to customer note in Shopify, mentioning the word or the keyword I put, and also it has been added or appended with the ID from Shopify. That's the internal sales order ID in Shopify. Anyway, you can see the customer information, account information, and the main contact, the shipping and billing address. If you look at the items, you can see the product with a quantity 1 and the price 430. And that's really the order that we did from Shopify. If we click on here or press here, we're gonna go for more details of that sales order in BYD, and you can see in the description part there is the sales order ID from Shopify has been recorded here. That is equivalent to 1058. That is exactly the same ID here, as just a proof of concept to us. Okay, so now we have seen that integration, or that quick integration happening between Shopify and BYD. Let's now start understanding how this exactly happened and how was the integration scenario has been built. Before going to the integration flow and explaining all the steps or most of the steps, I would like to jump to the Shopify developers homepage, where you can read more about REST admin API. And with that REST admin API, you are able to integrate Shopify to other systems. And if you look at the REST admin API, just scroll down there, you can see all the features of that API and what it contains. So here, for example, you can see in the REST admin API reference all the features and how to use, and the guide for all the sub APIs under this REST API. One of those APIs is the order API that allows you to read orders, create orders, cancel orders, fulfill orders, and that's really part of our integration scenario. Another important sub API of the REST API, that is the event API, that will enable us to fetch event data or to register webhooks to keep our app synced with the merchant store, as you can see from the definition. So what I used in my scenario, and please remember this during this video, is the event API to catch and fetch any order related event, and based on a new event, I'm gonna use the order API in order to, read the order details and then transform it into a sales order representation structure that can be posted through the Business by Design or maybe S4HANA Cloud OData API. So let's go further and look at the event API, and here you can see the entity relationship. Okay, you can have events related to products or for example related to orders and so on. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can see the events that are generated by the following resources. If you click also on the orders here, you can see the relevant order events and so on and so forth. Now I'm gonna just search for endpoints. Okay, and in that section in the event API page, you can see the filters, okay, that you can apply, or let's say the queries you can apply on the HTTP GET method, where you access the admin API, the event sub API, and then you look for, or you filter for products or orders and so on and so forth. Okay, here for example, the limit is just to limit the number of results, maybe only one record to retrieve. There is a most important query here is the filter that really will show you events specified in a specific filter value. Here I'm using the event API to look for the event of type order, so we have to use that filter. Okay, and since ID means show me only the events after a specific ID, because every event that comes has a specific ID, and then the next event will be having another ID. So of course it's like kind of increasing numbers. So then if I really set the default value of my integration scenario with a parameter that's called event ID, then I'm always looking for events after that ID. So we have to start with the default value, and then after this we're gonna increase and look for the next events, and so on and so forth. And filter is always important to look for events that is related to orders, or otherwise your integration scenario, you're gonna look for any event type. Okay, and here if you scroll down a little bit, you can see how to, like some samples and examples, how to, for example, to read from the events API and filter for order events, or maybe look for all events, and even you can see the response. It looks like this. For example, here we have received an event. That's the ID of the event, that's the order ID, and this is the timestamp where the order or the event was created due to the order creation, and that's the event type. These are technical terms, so don't be confused with it. And the verb means the status, so this order was confirmed, and so on and so forth. Okay, if we now look at the other API, part of the admin REST API, that's called the order, and you can see the entity relationship. And here you can see, for example, with the order API, I can do refunds, transactions, fulfillment, get customer information, order risk, and so on and so forth. Now we also search for endpoints, and you can see here I can always use the HTTP method GET to access the order API and then look for orders with a status of maybe any or status closed or confirmed and so on and so forth. You can also add the query parameter ID to look for a specific order and read it. And this is what we are really using in our integration scenario. Also, since ID, you can read or look for orders after the last or maybe after the order with ID XYZ, for example. Okay, this is the creation timestamp of an order and also other parameters. Okay, if we scroll down a little bit, okay, we can go and see some examples. Yeah, here, for example, read orders with status any, read orders or one order with a specific ID. And this is exactly what we use. So based on the event API, we get the new event, and if it's of type order, okay, we accept it, and then based on that event call result, we will fetch the order ID, read the order ID, and then put it here in that query of the order API. So now I hope this is understood. Now we go to the integration scenario, and it's in edit mode. Already I clicked on or I pressed edit, and let's zoom in a little bit. Here you can see always you can add several steps in your integration scenario from this header, like receiver, sender, end, start events, mapping, transformation, make an external call, okay, or send them an email, some routing options, security related steps, persistence to write variables, that's we're gonna use in order to write variables, okay, validation steps, and so on and so forth. So here I'm gonna start this scenario with a timer. This timer is to run either, let me click here again, run once or scheduled on a specific day, on a specific time, or between let's say in a time frame, a specific time zone, and maybe it's running every minute. That's the frequency, okay, or every hour or every second. Or maybe it can be scheduled to be recurrent, also every minute in a specific time frame according to a specific time zone. It can be scheduled to recur daily or weekly or monthly. You can see all the options are available for this timer. So I'm gonna set it back to once. This is only for demo purpose, and this is why when we created an order in Shopify, I had to run this scenario once more in order for the timer to run, as I mentioned, once. Okay, then once this timer starts, the whole scenario gonna start, and here you can see I'm gonna skip the steps that might confuse you when I'm explaining the whole scenario in the beginning, and then I will get back to it when and if necessary. So in this second step, I'm making what we call request reply. You can see it somewhere here. It's gonna be an external call of type request reply. So I'm making a call requesting a reply back, and this call of type HTTP, and here I'm calling Shopify. Yes, so I'm gonna make an HTTP call to Shopify, and as you can expect in this call, in the connection details, you can see I'm calling the admin API. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Let's not forget I'm using the REST API in order to make a call to the event sub API, and afterwards the order sub API in order to get the order details and then do the mapping to business by design. So going back to the integration scenario, this is how I'm gonna call my Shopify store admin API and then looking for the sub API events. And here, these are the filters of type order and looking for the last event based on the property value last event ID. So here, that's a dynamic parameter that I have set in my scenario in order always to look for the next order or the next order event, let's say. Okay, and it's going to be a get call, and this is how I'm giving the authentication username and password. There are different authentication options, and here in the another section in the cloud integration, you can see how, or we can see how to create a key store in a secured storage that can really keep your authentication based credential safe and encoded. I'm going to show it later on. So this represents my credential, username and password in a secured way. And once we retrieve an event, if there is a new event based on the type order and since last event that happened, okay, before, then we get the results and use this step converter to convert the results from JSON to XML. In Shopify, we can really, let's say, post or read data in JSON format or payload. Okay, so that's why we converted to XML in order to further do some processing that I'm gonna speak about it shortly. Here, after the conversion, we go for this step, which is router or routing step, that I'm actually having two paths, either let's say yes or no. So here I'm asking in my scenario, is this a new event or not? Because you might have run this scenario, or it might be actually in reality running, listening for new events coming from Shopify, but no one created an order. So you can't really expect that the scenario will always create an order in the back end, reflecting or replicating one order into hundreds of orders in BYD. You have to be sure that this is a new order that has been created and it's not still replicated or reflected there in BYD, right? And this is how you really build the right logic. So here, I'm actually looking at the results and starting to check if there is a new event that has come up. So we expect the flow will continue. If not, there is no action. And then if this scenario runs again, it will call the admin API from Shopify, look for the latest order events. If there is a new one, the scenario again will continue, or no action will happen and the scenario will end. Okay. This is how I put the condition. I just use the trick, because when you receive a result from Shopify in JSON, okay, and then you convert it to XML, you expect also to have some headers in this result. Let's say payload, and one of the result headers, sorry, it's not a payload, it's a header. One of the header information is the content length. So if really I'm receiving no events, you see the content length is really minimal, it's under 14. That's specific to Shopify. If you have an event details, like as I showed you in this example, you get an ID, subject ID, blah blah blah. So the content length will be definitely more than 14. Okay, this is how it works with Shopify. But it might be, for example, that you get an error that there is no event with this filter query values and so on. It depends on the API that you are really using. There is no standard here. Let's say all the logic will be depend on the endpoints you are integrating and you are working with. So coming back to our scenario, not to lose the focus here, you can see I'm continuing by writing some variables. So there are 3 global variables here: last timestamp, last order ID, and last event ID. Those global variables are of this type, string, and we are using XPath because here we have converted the data from JSON to XML. So we are using XPath in order to be able to read from the results payload of the first call in Shopify, the events API. We want to read the event order timestamp, the event order ID, and the event ID itself. So this is really what we always use in order to look for the next event. So I'm setting this variable and assigning it the last event ID. So then when this scenario runs again, it will look, okay, at events after this event ID. That's why if we go back 1 second to this call to Shopify, you see that's the parameter referring to the last event ID. And in this step now I can show it to you, which is the first one. You can see in the it's a content modifier where I can modify the header or the body of the message, as well as add or delete properties. And here you can see the 3 properties referring or equivalent to the global variables: the timestamp, last order ID, and last event ID. And if we focus on the last timestamp property, okay, it's of type global variable, coming from this global variable last timestamp, and that's what we always update based on the events results payload. And there are some default values you can put in the beginning when you run this scenario for the first time. So this is really how the mechanism works. Afterwards, just let's go for the most important steps. There is another external call to request a reply from Shopify again, and this call, as you can imagine, and what makes sense here is to call the suborders API in order to get the order details based on the order ID we fetched and we got from the events ID, from the events API, sorry. And here I'm looking for the ID with this specific parameter or filter query IDs, and you can see that's the parameter or the second property, last order ID, that is coming from the assigned let's say value of that variable last order ID. All is coming from the results of the first call of the events. Now let's continue. I also convert the results payload from the second call to Shopify of the orders API from JSON to XML, and I'm looking again if this is a valid order or not. I look at the content. If there is a content, this means this order has really information that can be replicated in BYD. If this order is void or something wrong happened or someone has deleted it from Shopify, so you don't expect to see a valid order and then there is no action happening. And again, I'm just here adding in the log the payload of the order API call, and afterwards I convert back the data from XML to JSON, because we converted here to JSON to XML, sorry, in order to make some validation on the order content. If the order is valid, I'm converting back the data to JSON, and I'm doing here the transformation. And here I'm using, there are several ways of the transformation. You can transform in in XML format. I'm using JSON via this JavaScript that has been built specifically for this demo. And you can see here I'm not get into much details, but I'm retrieving the message out of the let's say the input parameter, and getting the body of the message, and based on the variable body, I'm converting it to JSON, parsing it into JSON, and reading all the details of the order. You won't really understand this until you go to the Shopify developers page and understand how the order payload looks like. And you can see a response example. You can see here an order, and this order contains an ID, a mail. You can have some information, for example, like it's a little bit long one, actually you need to understand it, but if you scroll a little bit here down in this response example, you can see, for example, the line items. I'm just trying to find it for you guys. Here, line item, this is the list of items, and each line item contains the product ID, the quantity, or what we call the SQ, okay? As well as, if you scroll down a little bit in the results or the payload results, you can see also some customer information. Anyway, not to prolong it, let's go back to the integration scenario. So I'm reading based on the payload result coming from the call of the Shopify orders API, the customer information, which is a buyer party ID, if there is any reference, the line items, and then checking if there are multiple items in the list or only one item. And now I'm let's say building the structure of the JSON body that is gonna be the results, okay, out of this JavaScript, and then those results will be the output of this JavaScript that then will be converted back to XML in order to be able to post it to as a sales order to Business ByDesign through the OData API. And this is how it works. And here, finally, we make an OData call to SAP Business ByDesign ERP Cloud. and that's my tenant, and this is how I'm calling my OData service for sales orders, where I can get, create, delete, update sales orders. And this is also the authentication. It's basic, where I am storing my credentials, username and password in a key store in a secured and encoded way. And here you can see in the processing, okay, I'm making a create call, because this is really a creation of an order, and this is the sales order collection. That's the resource path. And if you really select here, you can see that you can connect to your tenant remotely. And okay, let's say if I proceed, then you can choose the proxy type, the authentication, then step 2, and here you can choose the operation type, and then you're gonna look, for example, for sales order creation. That's my entity, and you can see you can choose, for example, item information, buyer party information, and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna cancel this because I really don't want to change any configuration here. And you can always set and configure the content type and the encoding and so on and so forth, if there are any headers to add into the requests, okay, like request headers or maybe even response headers. Then that's the end. You end up with like end event, okay, like this one, end event. So this is really basically how is it. So just to wrap up, we made two HTTP calls to the Shopify admin API, one to the events API in order to get the latest order events, and based on that we fetch the order ID, and we use that order ID as a parameter or as let's say a query parameter into the second Shopify call for the order API in order to get the order details. If the order is valid, then we do some conversion, some mapping in order to build the JSON payload for the sales order structure in BYD, and use the BYD OData API to post that order. That's really briefly speaking. And if we just jump to Business by Design and go for the application and user management, the OData service under input and output management business area, we're gonna look for custom OData services, and then we can see that sales order, the one that I made the call to in order to create an order or a sales order in Business by Design. So of course you have to understand the endpoint, let's say Shopify, and also the endpoint Business by Design integration capabilities. So in Business by Design, it's really easy. You can build your custom OData service here. You wanna do an integration, use business partner, business object, or sales order, or invoice, price list, whatever. So you can use it here. So you have really to choose your business object. In my case, I choose the business object sales order. Okay, and you can see also the header information, sales order, under the CRM module, and you can see here all the fields we have chosen as let's say elements, okay, that can be consumed or used in this sales order OData service. And you can see also the link to the metadata of this OData service. You can click on it and you can see the XML representation of this metadata. You can understand about all the entity relationship, all the entity properties, and how you can make use of this OData. And one of them, of course, will be, if you just search for the sales order collection, you can see here. That's the one that we used for creation of sales orders. So I hope that was useful to you guys. I hope that you have got to understand this simple integration scenario. Of course, integration might be, let's say, more complex if you require, let's say, several calls to several endpoints and multi-data sources and so on and so forth. But this is just the beginning, and it's really quite easy to learn how to use this Cloud Platform Integration Suite and build integration scenarios easily, connecting on-prem to on-cloud or vice versa, or cloud to cloud application, and really benefiting from the, let's say, the advanced features of this integration platform. So thank you very much, and in case of questions, please don't hesitate to get back to me or to the local solution expert in your region from SAP, plus also the channel sales manager, in order to understand more about the capabilities of the SAP Integration Suite. That is actually one of the base, let's say, capabilities of the business technology platform that is actually made to let customers do intelligent enterprise and be ahead of the competition. Thank you very much.